Christmas 2024 was unlike any other. Not because there were no lights or because families didn't get together, but because the signs of something bigger were everywhere. As people decorated their homes, bought presents and prepared suppers, there was a sense that the world was on the verge of a great change. Something invisible, but palpable. The most sensitive sensed this. Some people began to have strange dreams. Others felt an inexplicable anguish. Prophets and seers, such as Ryo Tatsuki, began to talk about a series of global events predicted for 2025. But contrary to what many people think, the signs didn't start the following year, but at Christmas 2024. It was at this time that the first warnings began to appear. The signs were present in nature, in dreams, in people's behavior, and even in the silence that invaded the hearts of many. These signs were not visible to everyone, but those who had eyes to see and ears to hear noticed them. Now let's understand each of these signs that preceded Christmas 2024 and that point to the great events of 2025. In the days leading up to Christmas 2024, nature began to show signs in an intense and undeniable way. Each natural element, wind, fire, water, and earth, seemed to act in an unusual way, outside the pattern that everyone was used to. People from all over the world reported events that would previously have been considered impossible for that time of year. The rains that had always been quiet in December turned into unexpected storms. Regions that traditionally had stable weather began to experience unusual windstorms, and even mountainous areas began to report unexpected snowfall phenomena or unseasonable droughts. The world, which had always had a well-defined natural cycle, began to disobey the climate rules we knew. The wind was the first to show signs. Over the weeks leading up to Christmas, the wind became stronger and stronger. This was no ordinary December wind. It blew with unexpected force, rattling windows, making trees bend, and in some regions, even blowing down branches and small roofs. Many people reported that, at night, the sound of the wind was more frightening than usual. The gaps in doors and windows whistled intensely, and some people said that the noise sounded like a distant wail or scream. It was as if the wind wanted to warn that something bigger was coming. In some mountainous regions, the wind brought something even more worrying. Winds known as dry winds blew so intensely that they started spontaneous fires in forest areas. In North America, the strong wind caused the flames of a forest fire to spread faster than normal, leaving firefighters with no control over the situation. In the southern hemisphere, where December rains were normally abundant, the wind came in a dry and hot form. Places that had an abundance of moisture began to report rivers and lakes drying up. Something that normally only happened at the height of summer began to occur in the middle of December. Farmers began to lose their crops, and entire communities had to search for water on an emergency basis. The wind, however, didn't just bring physical problems. It brought disquiet to people's minds. Some said that the wind carried a different sound. It was as if there was a hidden message in the whistle. For those with greater spiritual sensitivity, the wind is never just a meteorological phenomenon. It is an invisible force that moves with purpose. The most attentive realized that this wind was more than a weather warning. It was a voice announcing what was to come. Just like the wind that preceded the opening of the Red Sea in the Exodus, this wind seemed to be blowing to make way for something much greater. Sudden rains were also one of the signs that made a big impact. Regions that should have been dry faced unseasonable storms. Flash floods were reported in areas that were not affected by floods, and cities were not prepared. Lakes and rivers began to overflow suddenly, causing damage to riverside communities. In some European cities, water took over the streets, submerging cars and entire houses. Venice's canals, which normally run dry in December, were fuller than expected. Scientists were confused, as the weather forecasts did not indicate the arrival of so much rain. Another clear sign that nature was out of control was unexpected fires. Many regions known for being cold and humid began to report spontaneous fires. In Canada, dense forests began to burn in places where fire never spread. Reports from firefighters pointed out that the flames were unusual because the ground was still damp, but the flames came out of nowhere. In the United States, the fire broke through forests and reached small towns, something that didn't happen so easily. The fire, which was supposed to be controlled by the moisture in the soil, seemed alive, as if something invisible was feeding it. These fires were considered the strangest of the century by some meteorologists. The boreal forests, known for their intense cold, began to burn. Instead of the snow putting out the flames, the fires spread inexplicably. This gave rise to theories among experts, but for the most sensitive, the fire represented purification. Many spiritual traditions say that before a great transformation, fire appears as a way of clearing the ground for something new. Just like the fire that descended on Sodom and Gomorrah, many people believed that those fires were a warning of purification and global renewal. Finally, a sign that went unnoticed by many, but was picked up by people of faith: the silence in the heavens. At Christmas 2024, many people who lived near airports or under flight paths began to notice that the sky was quieter. The planes disappeared. At first, people didn't pay much attention, but as the days went by, the most attentive realized that something was wrong. The flights weren't following their normal routes. Commercial planes that used to fly over large cities were no longer seen or heard. This signal was subtle but powerful. The silence in the skies symbolizes the stoppage of something greater. Many believe that this represents the beginning of a standstill cycle, where the modern world, which never rests, is forced to pause its activities. Christmas, which is usually a busy time, was preceded by this silence in the sky. This was a clear sign to the chosen ones. Something was coming. For those with eyes to see and ears to hear, these signs were not just random weather events. They were a preparation for 2025, when the great global events would unfold. The strong wind, the spontaneous fire, the sudden rain, and the silence in the skies form a perfect picture of rupture and transformation. All the elements of nature were screaming, but most people were too busy with the holidays, Christmas shopping, and modern distractions to notice. These deserted cities had a strange atmosphere. The streets were empty, but at the same time there was the feeling that someone or something was watching. Many dreamers reported that when walking in these cities, they felt a heaviness in the air, a sense of emptiness, as if something was missing in the world. Some described the sound of a strong wind whistling in the background, which added to the feeling of loneliness and abandonment. This dream was not exclusive to spiritually sensitive people. Ordinary people who had never paid attention to spiritual signs began to share this dream on internet forums and message groups. That's when they realized that many people around the world were dreaming the same thing. In one of these discussions, someone mentioned, "I've never had nightmares like this, but suddenly I started seeing a dark, silent city. I saw no cars, no people, just empty streets and the sound of the wind. I felt afraid, but at the same time, I felt I needed to walk." The strange thing was that, at the end of the dream, I heard a voice saying, "Get ready for the silence." This dream became so frequent that even experts in oniric studies, the study of dreams, began to notice the pattern. Many people began to ask themselves, what does prepare for silence mean? The chosen ones got the message. They knew that silence was not just the absence of sound, but the absence of information, connection, and communication. They understood that the dark cities symbolized the global blackout that was about to take place. Another strong spiritual sign leading up to Christmas 2024 was the sight of giant waves. People around the world began to report dreams and visions of entire cities being covered by immense waves of water. But curiously, these waves didn't seem natural. They didn't come from seas or oceans. Some people reported that the waves sprang from the sky, as if they were an inverted rainstorm that turned into a wall of water. Others described the waves coming suddenly, without warning, and submerging cities in a matter of seconds. For some people, these visions were symbolic. They didn't interpret the waves literally, but as a wave of global change. These waves represented something much bigger than just water. They symbolized the impact of sudden global events that would submerge the world. Others, however, saw the waves literally, interpreting that there would be huge tsunamis in 2025, capable of swallowing up coastal cities. In both interpretations, the message was clear. The world would be shaken by uncontrollable forces. In spiritual symbolism, waves represent collective emotions, sudden changes, and chaos. Like Noah's flood, water always comes as an instrument of purification. For the chosen ones, these visions made it clear that the world would undergo a cleansing. A great wave, whether literal or spiritual, was about to sweep away the old to make room for the new. The spiritual signs didn't just come through dreams. Many people, when praying or entering moments of deep meditation, reported feelings of alertness. Some people felt a sudden chill, even though they were in warm places. Others reported a feeling that someone was standing next to them, watching. People in countries such as the United States, Brazil, Japan, and Germany reported that banking apps simply wouldn't open or crashed on the home screen. Many saw their accounts frozen, meaning they couldn't transfer money or access their balances. Some people became desperate, as they needed the money to pay bills, buy food, and do their Christmas shopping. The queues at ATMs began to grow. People who had previously trusted digital banks realized that if the system stopped, they would no longer have control over their money. There were cases where ATMs ran out of cash because banks were unable to replenish them in time. In some Latin American countries, the situation was even worse. The banking system was disconnected for several hours. This was not made public, but those who tried to use debit and credit cards noticed that payments were refused. In supermarkets, the queues were huge, as the ATMs were unable to process transactions. This event was called the financial blackout, and was the first clear sign that the global financial system was not as secure as everyone believed. The chosen ones, attentive to this signal, began to take action. They knew that relying 100% on digital money was a risk. They started keeping physical cash at home and buying long-lasting food. While many believed it was just a temporary problem, the chosen ones knew it was a warning that the financial blackout of 2025 was coming. Another important technological sign was the emergence of glitches in the global internet. Throughout December 2024, people in various parts of the world began to report sudden drops in connection. These were not local failures, but large-scale outages. Internet providers faced technical difficulties, and mobile networks became unstable. The most noticeable failures occurred in messaging apps. Those using WhatsApp, Telegram, and Messenger noticed that, on certain days, messages were not delivered or took a long time to arrive. Video calls crashed, and many thought it was a signal problem. But the truth was different. There were reports of failures on several servers around the world. Banking applications, social networks, and even streaming services, such as Netflix and YouTube, were down for a few hours. The technology companies explained these failures as routine maintenance, but for the chosen ones, it wasn't like that. They noticed that these outages were becoming more frequent and longer. What used to last 5 minutes began to last 30 minutes or more. This indicated that control was slipping out of the hands of the technicians and specialists. These failures were accompanied by GPS crashes. People driving on roads or using navigation apps such as Google Maps and Waze noticed that the GPS was inaccurate. Cars that were supposed to take a safe route were taken onto the wrong streets. There were reports of people ending up in unfamiliar places because the GPS simply stopped working for 10 to 15 minutes. The chosen are not the strongest, but the most prepared. They are not those with the most material wealth, but those with unshakable spiritual fortitude. Being chosen doesn't mean living without fear, but it does mean knowing what to do, even when fear comes. While the world is distracted, the chosen are attentive. While many rush to the stores in search of Christmas presents, the chosen are storing up faith and love in their hearts, because they know that the greatest gift has already been given, Jesus Christ. Christmas 2024 was the last big warning before the events of 2025. But this is not a message of despair. This is a message of renewal, hope, and transformation. God doesn't send signs to scare us. He sends signs to prepare us. He invites us to reconnect with Him and with what is essential in life. The silence that will come in 2025 doesn't have to be a silence of fear. It can be a silence of reflection and reconnection with God. Nowadays, the noise of social networks, cell phone notifications, and the constant din of television take us away from what is most important, our relationship with the Father. But in silence, the modern world loses its power, and God's voice becomes clearer. Remember what is written in 1 Kings 19:11-12, when the prophet Elijah looked for God in the strong wind, the earthquake, and the fire, but God was not in any of these phenomena. God was in the still, small voice that came after the silence. We often expect God to reveal Himself in the midst of chaos, but in fact He manifests Himself in silence. Silence is not the end. Silence is a new beginning. In silence, God speaks. In silence, God shows us the way. The noise of the world confuses us, but God's silence brings us clarity. Christmas 2024 was not a night of endings. It was the beginning of a new cycle, a spiritual renewal for the chosen ones. If you are feeling called to strengthen your faith and prepare yourself spiritually for the challenges of 2025, I want to extend a special invitation to you. There is a way to strengthen your spirit, to draw closer to God, and to understand your purpose as a chosen one. This invitation is for you to take part in the Chosen 40 Days with Jesus devotional. This devotional is not just another prayer book. It is a 40-day journey that will help you reconnect with the essence of Jesus Christ. Each day brings a profound reflection, a heart-touching teaching, and a powerful prayer to guide your steps. Just as Jesus walked 40 days in the desert before starting His mission, you too will be invited to walk 40 days on a journey of transformation. The Chosen devotional was inspired by the series that moved the world and brought a new perspective on the life of Jesus and His disciples. But more than a series, it's a call for you to be one of God's chosen too. If you've watched the series, you know that the disciples were ordinary people, but they were chosen because they were willing to listen to the call. They weren't perfect, but they were courageous. And you can be like that too.